Hey y'all, welcome to Married to a Shrink podcast. I am Allie, licensed psychotherapist who specializes in couples and sex therapy. And we are going to get down and dirty with all kinds of conversations with my husband, Michael.
Howdy, y'all. I'm Michael. I am not a therapist. I'm a regular average Joe and the lucky guy married to Allie here.
This is our first episode and going to launch into how Michael and I met and what the initial thoughts were around being partnered with someone who does this work on the day-to-day. So my first question for you, Michael, is can you share your initial thoughts when you saw my dating profile on the league?
Honestly, my initial thoughts were, I'm like, this is a really pretty woman. So it was physical initially, but started scrolling through your pictures. You had a picture of a dog, picture of you and your family, two things that are important to me. It enticed me to continue to read your profile and eventually swipe. That I was interested.
Swipe, and I swiped.
You swiped first.
I swiped first. And what we matched, 2 weeks after that?
About that.
Okay. So I put on my profile that I was a couples and sex therapist. Do you remember that?
I do.
What did you initially think when you found out that that's what I did for a living?
Honestly, I'm like, this could be fun.
Really? I'm kind of surprised by that. What do you mean?
Well, the therapist portion was like, obviously, this is someone that knows how to communicate, which isn't a strength of mine. But it's obviously someone that cares about people, and it's definitely interesting that you were a sex therapist. That was something I know I told my friends early on.
What did you say?
I said, she's a sex therapist. And they're like, well, that could be different.
That's funny. Well, and what else, like, that's really funny. I think you told me that, but I had kind of forgotten that you told me that. But what, like, were you nervous about going on a date with a therapist, especially one who specializes in relational dynamics?
It had not crossed my mind as a concern.
When did it start to become more real that you were dating someone who all they did was this?
As our relationship quickly blossomed, I think it was just how technical and how you would pick up on things. I quickly realized, like, wow, this person really knows what they're talking about. I can't fumble through this. She's going to call me out on things that don't make sense.
Did that add pressure?
Maybe a little bit initially. It still to this day at times has a certain dynamic to it.
What do you mean?
Word choice is always a really big thing. I may have the right intention on what it is that I want to get across, but if the word's not right, it has a totally different meaning.
Because what do I always say?
It's not intent. It's the actions. It's what you actually say and do.
Yeah. I know. I can recognize that because that's fair. Because I will, like, go back and ask you if that's what you really meant or if you want to choose different words. Because for me, words have very intense meaning and they're very precise. And I think you initially, and I think you maybe still struggle with this. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Like, if I don't want to be speaking for you, but I think the ideology around a word having a particular meaning, especially within the context of a situation, is really, like you said, kind of precise. Like, you have to be really thoughtful about what you are wanting to say and what you are trying to communicate across. Because I know and we'll talk about this in future episodes, one of our biggest struggles we have had as a couple is communication. Would you agree?
I would absolutely agree.
Because do you think that is partly because I'm a trained therapist in relational dynamics?
It's probably a component to some degree. I think it's just that we both care immensely and we always strive to be better and get better at the small things each day. And I think the fact that you're a therapist and words are so intentional, I think it adds a certain component to it.
And it adds pressure, I know. I know that we've talked about how you don't always feel like you have the grace to, I'm going to say, like, misspeak or finish that thought for me.
I think it's because of some of my communication is still a growing process, and I still have a ways to go before and I don't think I'll ever reach where you are with regards to your communication. But early on, there was such a deficit with our communication, or with my communication with you and expressing myself. Over time, it got better, and it got stronger. But I think some of those initial shortcomings, I feel like when I start to go down one of those rabbit holes, you kind of jump that, oh, Michael's going to be doing this again because this is what he's historically done.
Because I pick up on patterns. Because that's my job as a therapist, is to see patterns and to re-navigate those patterns. And so I can completely recognize that when you start to go down those tracks that I feel like we've been on here before, especially with your ADHD, you'll start to tunnel down, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to go here again, and I know sometimes I can get impatient because I'm just like, I feel like another pattern, like I feel like I'm seeing the pattern again, and then that's where I start to break down in my communication. That's where I start to get frustrated, right?
Yes, you do.
And so, like, since when we first met and to where we are now, which is multiple years later, how do you think my profession has influenced our relationship? Let's start from the beginning. Like, you said it really didn't influence a whole lot, but besides the communication initially, how else did it influence in the beginning?
Well, I think in the beginning, I had my own baggage that I brought to the relationship from prior relationships. And some of that baggage I don't think was ever properly processed. And not that I went to you for that therapy, but I think as your partner, you as my partner, I think you recognize, like, hey, for Michael to be his best self in our partnership, there's stuff that he needs to get through. And I think with your expertise as a therapist, you pointed out some things that I probably need to address. I need to do some soul searching on. You suggested that I see my own therapist.
We went to couples therapy.
So I think because of your therapeutic background, that all came to fruition.
Yeah. I mean, fair, but I think you were very willing to, kind of, because we couldn't build. We weren't able to build what we have now with some of the, like you claimed, the baggage, some of the unresolved relational issues that you had carried.
Sure. If that cornerstone isn't solid, your foundation's not going to be as strong.
And so a few years in, how did my role as a therapist, do you think, affect our relationship?
Made it a lot stronger.
Really? You weren't annoyed as all get out? Because do you remember, like, year 3 was pretty rough. And, like, communication was at, like, an all-time low. We had a lot of stressors. And I was seeing a lot of patterns. And I think a lot of your attachment style was not secure. And then your family of origin had created some dynamics when you came into our marriage that made it challenging for you to process through stress and communication and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. True.
Right? And so were you not terribly annoyed with me that I was constantly, like, trying to re-navigate us and put us, because I remember you being really upset a few times when you're just like, just leave it. And I was like, no, but this is me caring. It's like, is me having these disagreements with you means I'm in this with you. And I think for you, you had found any kind of disagreement was a push apart in the relationship because you did not know how to navigate conflict. And please, if I'm speaking for him,
no, that's a completely accurate statement. I think historically, based on prior relationships, based on my family of origin, we didn't deal with conflict. You would just kind of shrug your shoulders, sweep it under the rug, and change the topic. And I still
move on.
and I think in small things that can work, but I think oftentimes it builds, and then you start to develop some resentment. And you've really bettered us, and I think you've taught us a lot. You've taught me a lot of life lessons. It's not just with regards to partnership, but how it is outside of our home, the communication on how things have to be dealt with and need to be addressed.
Well, thank you. That's kind of you to say. Well, because what I always say with my couples is resentment is a silent killer, right? Resentment and then apathy. But I think for you, there was so much, like that 3-year mark, we had so much going on that I feel like you wanted me to kind of be more apathetic because that was more comfortable, right? Whereas like for me, I was like, no, if apathy and resentment will kill a relationship. It will halt its longevity, right? If you get to that point, because once resentment builds to such a capacity, there is really no coming back from it. And that apathy also is associated with that, where if you're just willing to be like, no, we don't need to move forward through this, like we'll just brush it under the rug, then that will continue to build, and then you'll get resentment, and then the relationship becomes a whole lot harder to repair. You have to do a whole lot more work. But I know that in that like 3-4 year mark, I think you were really challenged and had a really hard time with the understanding that me pushing back and being like, no, we are going to fight, not talk, but fight, because we were so passionate about something, right? And be like, we're going to do this. And it was so uncomfortable for you that I think you had wished I had been apathetic. But I was trying to explain or get you to kind of understand that, like, if we don't move past this, it becomes a lot harder further down the road, right?
Sure. No, in those moments, I think I was wishing you would be more apathetic. At this point, looking back, I'm very grateful that it was your way of saying, hey, we're better than this. Our relationship is worth something. And it was never a consideration of ending our relationship. That was not it at all.
Never happened. Yeah.
But you're absolutely right that making those moments uncomfortable for us to address those problems, those issues, has only led to where we are today as a couple and as a partnership. And
I know you still get uncomfortable. You've gotten way, way, way better though. But it still makes you uncomfortable.
At times it certainly does. My natural tendency from 44 years of living, it was one way for 40, 30, whatever the math is, 30 plus years of...
And our 6 years age different, whatever. Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. And I know that, again, I think that's part of the challenge of being partnered and married to a therapist, is that there is that push towards communication and to move through conflict that I think other couples just choose not to do. And to be fair, it's uncomfortable at its best. And sometimes it was just flat out, like, I'm trying to think of a word that is, like, it was painful, I think, at some points. When it was, the miscommunication was so apparent, and we could not like decipher through and move through, and you were so uncomfortable. And to be frank, I think you were in some pain too, because I think you also were carrying some attachment issues and carrying a lot of fear. I'm not going to say some fear. I would say a lot of fear. Does that feel accurate? Towards like abandonment and other things that had come.
I think fear in a lot of my life is historically been a driver for my actions.
Such a true statement. Such a true statement, babe. Yeah, I hear that.
But again, I don't think it was something that I ever would have recognized had it not been for you.
That fear is a driver.
Mm-hmm.
What's your first reaction?
Sure.
With everything.
Sure.
Is a fear, and that took some getting used to for me, because I would have to be like, well, why are we going here, right? Like, like that's not even on my radar. And so with all of that, what were some misconceptions that you had about, like, let's be frank, did you think we'd be having sex every day because I was a sex therapist? Or did you think, what are some misconceptions you had about being partnered and married?
I don't know if I realize, just on the day-to-day, being married to a shrink, what it means for the smallest of conversations.
I'm so annoying. It's so true, but please elaborate.
I mean, I think I used the metaphor over the weekend. Like, sometimes it feels like this is not even a speed bump or not even an anthill of a topic, and somehow it just doesn't become a mountain. It's not insurmountable, but it's a molehill. And, it's fun to navigate looking back. But sometimes in the moment, it's like, why are we still talking about this? That is.
It's so true. But I don't do well with simplicity, because I see all the dynamics and I see the opportunity and I see the patterns. And so I don't know how to not. And I need to be better about that, because I know it can be, again, at its best, like kind of annoying, and at its worst, like, I wouldn't say harmful, but it can deviate us from.
It's a big word. I don't know what that means.
It can move us away from what we're really focusing and like trying to accomplish, because I do struggle to just let it go and not have something acknowledged that is a dynamic structure or a paradigm. Like I have a really hard time not acknowledging it.
I can, yeah.
And I know, and I recognize that, and it's like I know I'm doing it, and I know that I'm like, you're operating as a therapist, like you're not sitting across from clients right now, like you don't need to decipher this and to really navigate this in the way you're doing it, yet I do, because I think I just so badly like want someone like with me in it, because I spend all of my time is on the outside looking in to other people's relationships. And so I think there's this innate like desire for me to pull you in to my world, because I find it kind of lonely. Not kind of. I think we've talked about this. I find it lonely to be a couples therapist, because I feel like I see all the dynamics and I see them all so intimately. I'm so intimately involved in people's most sacred relationships is often the one we have with your partner, right? Because it's the only relationship you can really choose. And so it's such an intimate space. And I think I'm so much on the outside looking in that I think when in those moments where I make something I dive deeper into it than what is really necessary. I think I just am looking for some sort of like matched commonality towards that, towards our relationship. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, I think, let me try to repeat that back. I know more than anything, you yearn for connection and a deep feeling of being known.
Yeah, that's true. That's my biggest fear in life, is never to be truly known. That's like my...
It's your number one. That's
That's
your
my
fear.
number one fear. So continue.
So I think your desire to just get so granular on the smallest of topics, I think it's possibly driven by your desire to be known, because it's not a big topic in the grand scheme.
It's not.
But by gosh means, I'm going to know you in that topic.
Yeah, I think so. I think that is my... I mean, we all have our fear landscapes, right? And everything, our values and everything interjects in whenever we're communicating and whenever we're relating to people. And especially as we have navigated our marriage and our partnership, I do think that is partially why I make things more complicated. I wouldn't... complicated is the right word, but it's also, I think I make things more, clinical, and I do make them more like therapeutic when they need to be. When sometimes they just need to be just straight up logistical, or it just needs to be a, hey, my bad, like I didn't really mean that, and it's hard for me. I think sometimes you're still developing the skill sets. And like when you didn't have the skill sets, it was really challenging for me. But I think now that in the tenure of our relationship, you've developed a lot of the skill sets that are needed to kind of navigate communication, just general, but I think also communication with someone who's trained and thinks in the way that I do about relationships, because you'll start to like validate at the very beginning, which is always what I'm always teaching my couples when you communicate, is the first thing you should always be doing is doing a validation, right? And then you can lead towards, because a validation doesn't mean you agree. It's just an acknowledgement that you're seen and that you're heard, because all people want to be seen and heard. And so I think that's really where I can start to spiral. So when I don't feel... I think like spiral is the right word. Would you give me another word for that? When I start to latch on and I really just try to really push us towards a conversation on something, to go deeper on something, when I think sometimes we do. And I think to your point, other times I think a simple validation and just a skill set play would alleviate a lot of it.
I would agree. I think spiral was the appropriate term. I think it's a valid term.
But I think it's not that I don't expect our relationship to be superior because of my work, because we are very flawed as people, but I want us to be authentic. And to your point, I spend so much time looking into other people. I want to make sure that I'm getting the connection
that you're helping train your clients.
That I'm helping train my clients. Like, I don't want to be a stinking fraud and be like, here, I'm so glad that y'all are getting this and doing this, but like, I'm not getting it within my own relationship. Do you know what I mean?
No, that makes complete sense. And I think you've done our relationship and our family a big service.
I don't know about that. I mean, no, I just think, but it's also selfish because I'm wanting it too. It's not like I'm like altruistic where I'm doing this for the sake of our marriage and our relationship. Like, I'm also doing it because selfishly I want the connection. Like, it feeds into my fear
of being known.
Of being known, right? And because that's why the only way I was going to meet someone is through a dating website, because obviously I meet with clients. So that's not the avenue. I wasn't ever going to meet someone in a bar or anything like that because that's just not my scene. And so the online was, I think, if you don't come out of college or meet through like friends, I feel like online, especially in my line of work, is the only option. And so it was, I knew that would be the avenue of which I would find my partner. But I guess I have not always realized the impact that it is to be partnered with someone who does this for a living, which is what we will talk about in lots of episodes to come. But any other thoughts about how you feel like my career has impacted our relationship?
Well, I mean, like I mentioned earlier, it's not only impacted our relationship, but it's also spread into how I interact with others, say with my boss or my own parents. Again, growing up being very conflict avoidant, now, as difficult as it is in times, if there's something that I would have otherwise just pushed under the rug and moved on, oftentimes I find myself calling it out now.
I'm so proud of you. Mm-hmm. Or like what you did today.
Like I did today at work. Mm-hmm. I almost didn't do it, but I talked to my boss about something that was on my mind for like a week. And I had the confidence to bring it up. She had asked if there was anything else I wanted to talk about today, and the old Michael would have said, no, nothing.
It's not old Michael, the pre-married to Allie Michael.
Pre-married to a shrink Michael.
Well, and I think that also the conversations you've been having with your parents lately, mm-hmm. in terms of actually communicating how you feel about some things, and and I know that my next question for you was going to be like, what do you think have been the surprises or the challenges? Well, we've already kind of talked about the challenges, mm-hmm. but the surprises about maybe married to a shrink.
Surprises.
Or some of the challenges. I can think of one to get you started if you need
I'd love to hear it.
Boundaries. I think you were surprised with how boundaries, how important they are, and how positive they can be. Because I think for you, boundaries had always been a threat to the relationship.
It was more of an enmeshment, or became to
you an enmeshment. Mm-hmm. That was your natural state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes. No. I've definitely boundaries is a good one. I've now recognized that you have time that you need for yourself. I have time I need for me, and then we have time together. And having some of that separate time when we're together, it just makes it that much better.
Yeah. That's the concept of intimate separateness, right? Mm-hmm. Is the ideology that you have your own interests and hobbies and relationships, but then the relationship itself has its own, and they should be separate. Because I think that was surprising to you that enmeshment was not the desired state for couples.
Sure.
Yeah. And I think you're also surprised that boundaries are healthy and very positive. And that I think you're surprised also how openly I communicate about boundaries.
You're very open. You're open in communication and always.
But like how I think you were originally threatened whenever I would say, hey, my love, like that's crossed a boundary for me. Can we not do that? And initially, you did not like that.
Yeah, I
What
think
did that do for you when I said that?
I think when you would say that in those moments, it was almost like I felt like my feelings were hurt in that moment.
Hurt? Why?
It depends on I can't think of what the topics would have been, but it's almost like a blow to your confidence in that moment in time.
Hmm. How else have boundaries made you uncomfortable?
Enforcing the boundaries.
What do you mean?
As someone that's naturally conflict avoidant, if you're going to set a boundary,
Yeah.
you've got to stick to the boundary. Being someone that's conflict avoidant, that creates opportunities for friction.
Yeah. I mean, that's fair. That's fair. What other surprises? I gave you that one. That was a freebie.
Yeah.
What other surprises or challenges do you think there has existed? Because I can think of another one.
Is it related to a 3-letter word?
It is related to a 3-letter word.
In which way?
Let's see if you're going to say it.
Sex?
Oh, he said it.
And what about sex?
You tell me. I'm going to give you my perception, but what do you think have been surprising and or in relation to like a couples therapist? Because I can relay conversations we had like last week.
Yeah, refresh my memory.
So, consent.
Yes.
The concept of consent, and also like I feel like your romantic notions have all come from movies and like media, and it is that everything you have seen in terms of social influence is how you have come into the ideologies and the notion of our intimacy.
Probably there's truth to that.
So challenge the non-truths. What's not true about that?
What's not true about that?
Yeah. Because from my perspective, all of like I'm like 95%
that's why I don't know
me came from like, oh, like this would be a great idea because I saw it or I read about it somewhere, so we're going to give it a try. And we're like I introduced the notion of consent and how consent should always be asked, and there's a sexy way to ask it. Like it's not like it doesn't have to be awkward, but it always needs to be present. And that was not a concept that you had ever heard of.
No, that was a new concept for sure.
But I think in your head, or what you had expressed, not in your head, I think you've expressed this, is that to give consent or to ask for consent in any kind of capacity, like kills the mood.
I think I've used those words. But again, I think it goes down to how it's asked.
I know we've talked about this now, but I think that has been, from my perspective, one of the surprises or challenges that I feel like you have had in being partnered with someone with my clinical background is because I would be like, no, that's not flying. Like you have to, there's a certain way that we can make this sexy and fun while consent is still being present. There's not, the pushed expectation or the elaborate for me. I know how uncomfortable you are with this topic, which also adds to the fact that it is a part of every marriage, yet it is so uncomfortable for you to talk about it. And I talk about it very bluntly. I talk about it very, I have no issues talking about it. And it's uncomfortable for you to talk about.
It is. I don't know if my face is getting red. I'm probably getting a little fidgety in my chair here. Yeah, it's kind of a taboo topic.
But why? Because It's part of every relationship or romantic relationship.
It is, and it's a great part of relationships. But I think, again, it goes to my family of origin. It was something that was not talked about.
You're a good old Catholic boy.
Yeah, it was something not talked about. And I know I get uncomfortable, even hard sometimes to say the word.
I know. I know. I think that was, again, I'm putting words in your mouth, but a surprise for you, just how blunt I am about it and how I use I would not say crass, but I use the clinical terms. I don't like.
No, you use the clinical terms.
I don't
yes.
and I'm always seeking consent, or I'm pushing for you to request consent and trying to teach you. But I know that has been one of a big frustration, and we've had a number of heated conversations around that. And I think boundaries in that, from my perspective, have been the biggest surprises that you just didn't see, or challenges maybe that you just didn't see coming when you partnered with a couples and sex therapist.
I think it's a fair statement.
Are there any that you can bring to the table, or it may just be my perspective?
I can't think of anything at the moment. You've already given me a handoff and a half.
and now he's like, and change the subject away from sex.
I can't think of anything.
What's so ironic about it is it's so uncomfortable for you to talk about, yet it is something that, like, you wish there was more frequency and there was more, like, so much around it, which is everyone. That's not unique to you, right? Like, that is every couple, and I use an absolute there, every couple who comes to me, sex is part of the therapeutic journey. I have yet to work with a couple in any capacity who's like, we're here for different reasons and we don't want you to touch that. Don't touch physical intimacy. We're good. We're golden. Like, it's yet to happen. I've been doing this for 15 years. So maybe it will. Maybe someone will challenge me and they'll come and be like, we don't want you to touch that, Allie, but like all this other stuff. So you're not unique in that. It's just, all I'm trying to bring up is that I think when you first started dating me and you found out what I do for a living, and then you partnered with me and then you married me, I think boundaries and sex were two things that just surprised you.
Yes.
Just with all the things that came in relation with that.
Sure.
And we navigate things just like every other couple does. You just happen to be having sex with a therapist. So it's weirder. Stranger? Weirder's not a word. Weirder's a word? Stranger?
Stranger, I think.
Stranger.
Stranger Things. Yeah, I think stranger's definitely a word.
Stranger. Accurate? Or am I speaking for you?
No, I think that was one of the things going in. I'm like, ooh, this sex therapist. Like, and then I think some of the specialization that you had with regards to your couples therapy were a little bit, I don't know what the right term is, exploratory.
Oh, you mean the ethical non-monogamy?
Well, ethical monogamy.
Which will be a whole other episode.
Yeah, just...
that was a fear you had, because I worked with ethical non-monogamous couples, that all of a sudden I was going to become a swinger.
Right.
Remember?
Right.
You were like really scared.
Yeah, I was early, and I'm like, that's not for me.
I know, and I had to explain that. I completely respect that. But just because I work with individuals who do choose that lifestyle, that doesn't mean that has to be a part of our dynamic. But you were always afraid.
I was early on, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So this is my last question for you. What are the fun things about being married to a shrink?
there's never a shortage of conversation because these little anthills can turn into something that we talk about for a long time. You've strengthened our relationship. Our relationship wouldn't be where it is if you didn't have your therapeutic background.
Well, thanks, but also I'd be a terrible therapist if our relationship was not stronger.
You're a wonderful mother.
Well, thank
And
you.
I mean, the way you've acted as a acted as a therapist for our children, children that have come through our home, that clinical knowledge that you're able to recognize when something's wrong and then kind of help address it and smooth out the problem. I think that's not necessarily surprising, but that's been a very positive thing about being married to a therapist.
I feel like some of my strengths in that is I'm not reactional. I think that's that therapy. Like, I've been told some very interesting things across from the couch, and you just have to, like, straight face and just not, like, and so I think it's created, and I think also my work as a social worker in crisis has created a dynamic where I'm not reactive.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that also helps with our
Yeah,
dynamic. Because I would say that we're the yin to the yang, where you tend to be much more reactive. Again, going back to that fear base, and I tend not to be
No,
as
you're
reactive.
much better in a conflict situation. You, in a moment of conflict, you're pretty calm.
Crisis. Yeah. Yeah.
In a moment of crisis,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, I would agree.
Unless it's regarding one of our dogs, then
That's a soft spot.
I'll be the calming one in that moment.
Yeah.
But I think some of that's really rubbed off because in that moments that we've had with our children, whereas in the past I would have got really heightened and worried and that fear would have kicked in, I now kind of find myself suppressing it some and like taking a step and just taking a breath and not get so worked up over it.
Yeah. Well, and I used to think that I would want to be long-term partnered with, like, a therapist, because then we could just, wax poetic and go through all the philosophical conversations about humanity. And then I realized, holy hell, that would be so challenging and so,
I feel like that Criminal Intent episode where the two therapists had that daughter that went
they were playing
nuts.
those games.
They were playing those games.
She went and murdered someone because of it.
The daughter wanted attention, so
she went and murdered that. Yeah, exactly. It's a really good reference. And I think, because I remember when I met you, and do you remember what I told you afterwards?
With you calling Sarah?
Yeah.
I do. You want to tell the listeners?
You can, or I can.
Yeah.
Yeah. So met with Michael and I had exchanged a few text messages. I don't know if you can tell from this, but he is very verbose and likes to do very long-winded text messages. I am a short and sweet kind of gal. I don't like my phone. I don't like really tech that much. I'm very relational. And so he was writing me really long text messages. I was like, but his profile was really cute and he was really handsome. And so I was like, oh, we're going on this date. And we went on our first date. And it was going so well. We continued the date and it was the
World
Cup. And
Belgium and the Netherlands.
Oh, you remember the game?
I remember the game. I remember your outfit.
I do remember my outfit.
Yeah.
That was a good outfit.
It was a good outfit.
I had my strawberry scarf on.
And your black booties, but similar to those.
I kind of like that. And you had said that, oh, see, now I'm going to butcher it. You're the romantic. I'm not the romantic.
Well, it was a weekday because I had read, I think in Maxim magazine, it's less pressure to go on a date on a weekday, and then if it goes well, you can set
All
up
your
a
information.
weekend date. You're talking about the darts?
Yeah.
Is that where you were getting to?
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Yeah, so we went to the bar across the street. We walked across the street, and we're there playing darts, and I was smitten. And I'm not a wonderful dart player, but you put some pressure on me, and I said...
I'm a terrible athlete, so the bar was really low.
but I remember saying to you that if I get a bullseye on this next throw, I get a second date. And you said, oh, you got that. You already have that. She's like, if you get a bullseye on this next throw, you get a kiss.
Yeah. Yeah. And you did.
I did.
And you did. And then we ran into one of my clients who was bartending. Yeah. Yeah. And so after that date, went home. I called my best friend Sarah, who lives out of state. And I was like, I just met my person. And she's like, no. I was like, this is a weird thing to say. And like, it's not very it's very like me to be. I'm very decisive. And I jump, and then I go back and figure it out later. That is very like me. Would you agree with that?
That's an accurate statement.
And so...
But I was date 33.
32.
32.
You were date 32.
I was date 32.
So I had...
Yeah?
To be fair, it was 32 dates over the course of 9 months. It's not like I was like...
Katherine Heigl in 27 dresses.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't think that's how you say her last name, but that was close enough.
I butcher everybody's name.
That is also, when we get to the episode about personality acceptance, one of them is one of my pet peeves is the how you always mispronounce people's names.
Paul, don't even ask me.
What is it?
Rude?
No!
Rudd.
Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd is the actor. But we'll get there. That's the personality acceptance episode. But all that to say, circling back to the original, is I had called her and said, like, I met a person. And, like, the first thing she was like, oh, is he also, a psychologist or a therapist? I was like, no. He's in finance. He doesn't do any of it. And she's like, but Allie, I was like, no, but this is going to be the yin to my yang. Mm-hmm. Because I am in my head so much, and I'm neurotic, and I can't be with another person who's neurotic in the same way I am. You're neurotic, mm-hmm. but you're neurotic in different ways. And so it becomes like the yin to the yang. Mm-hmm. Anything else before we close up?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
Okay.
I'm just very grateful that we paired up, and the romantic in me is like, as I've said, would have happened somewhere.
But it wouldn't have.
Yeah, it could have been a supermarket.
No one bumps that. There's meet cutes don't exist like that, or they do, but they're super rare. And again, that's because you got it from the movies.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, meet cutes do happen, just not. Yeah, but you have always said that, like, well, we would have met. And I'm always like, how? Like, we don't go to the same places. If you had come in as a client, that would have never happened. But I digress. You do always say that.
I do say that.
Because you are very romantic. And you have a very romantic heart and all the romantic notions where I am.
This is reality.
I'm a cynic. Let's be real. I am the person who sometimes just bursts into tears where I'm like, humanity is doomed and like you have to pull me off the ledge. Is that accurate?
Yes.
So, okay. Very glad that I met you too. We are going to talk about next time, we're going to talk about communication. And who knows, it could be a two-parter. But we're going to talk about communication, the challenges of communication, and kind of how we have navigated it and what you have learned from being partnered with me, because I've just taught you all the things that I teach my clients. And then we will go from there with lots of fun episodes about we're going to talk about lots of things. What else are we going to talk about? I have my list.
You do have your list. I only prepared for
We're going to talk about jealousy. We're going to talk about conflict, we're going to talk about personality,
Acceptance.
acceptance, attachment, lots of fun things.
I look forward to it.
Yeah. Love you.
Love you.